Hey guys, okay, so today we will see how we can work with scenes in VCV Rack. And I want to thank my Patreons for the nice idea for this video and also for their support. Thank you guys so much. And what do I mean by working with scenes? I have here a patch that I've built which has a few different voices. I have some drums, I have a bass, I have a sequence, melody and so on. And I want to create different sections of a song. I want it in one section or in one scene I will have only the drums playing, in another scene only the drums and the bass, and then another one with everything together, another one with just the bass and the melody, another one with just the sequence and the chords and so on, and create a structure for my song or for my track. And to do it manually with triggering the different scenes, or we can also do it automatically. We will see both ways today in the video, and in my case I will use the computer keyboard, my computer keyboard to trigger the different scenes, but you can use also external devices like a Midi controller with something that sends triggers like pads or a drum machine or something like this. You can also use a trigger module in VCV if you want to do this with the mouse. It's also possible, and we will see also how to make this automatically with the clock. And another thing, this patch will be available in the description in two different versions. The first version is just the patch by itself, and another one after we are finished with building the scenes, I will save the patch and it will also be available, so you have both versions. You can have a closer look, you can create your own scenes and experiment. And let's really start with listening to the different voices and see what we have here going on in this patch. It looks complicated, but it's really not. So let's just solo the first voice and unmute this. Okay, so we have the first voice. It's a sort of a kick coming from braids. It's receiving a trigger from the trigger sequencer. This is from Count Moduli, really interesting sequencer. This is the first voice. I have here also a sort of a closed hat, which is also receiving a trigger from the trigger sequencer. This is this module from Autodaffe. By the way, all of the modules I'm using today are available for free, and they are also all in the plugin manager, except of this mixer, and I will put a link in the description to where you can get this mixer from MSC Hack. So this is the second voice, the hi-hat, another one, open hi-hat, again receiving a trigger from this trigger sequencer. Then we have a sort of a rim shot. Again, Autodaffe receiving a trigger from the sequencer. Then we have a hi-hat. Now the hi-hat is receiving a trigger or a gate from the gate sequencer from Impromptu. And this is again a module from Autodaffe, but this is going first through a VCA. And the VCA is being modulated or automated by the by the ADDR sequencer from Bog Audio. So I'm creating a sort of a velocity movement with the sequencer and the VCA. And this is also, you can see that I'm also modulating the panning of the hi-hat. Now the pan CV input here on this specific mixer is working with negative positive 10 volts. Usually the other mixers are working with negative positive 5 volts, but this one is working with negative positive 10 volts. So what I'm doing, I'm sending the random voltage I'm using sample and hold from Brains. I'm sending it through a rescale from AS that is converting the negative positive 5 volts to negative positive 10 volts. You can see this here. So I have the full modulation range. So this was another voice. Here I have a steady or a 4 on the floor kick coming from Tremor, receiving again gates from the gate sequencer. Here I have one step with probability. So once it will play, once it will not play. Now it played. So I have here just a kick. Very nice. This is also receiving a clock from my main clock, Opalach from Impromptu. Here I have another voice. This voice is actually two voices or two channels. This is my bass. I have here two even VCOs. A sine wave is going directly to a VCA, which is 1 octave lower from another even VCO, which is actually more than 1 octave because I have it tuned also 7 semitones higher. And this is sending a sawtooth wave to tangents, again to the VCA, So I have a sort of a bass with a sub-octave. And also the VCA is being modulated by the ADSR. This one is from VCV, from the fundamentals. But what I'm doing here, I'm using a few sequences or a few outputs from the trigger sequencer. And I'm sending them, you can see this here, I'm sending them to a sequential switch. You can see I'm taking it from the sequencer. And I have a really slow clock divided by 16 to trigger the sequential switch. So I have 4 different sequences going to the bass. Let's listen to this for a second. You can see the change. Let's listen to this with a kick actually. You see, so I have a few different sequences for my bass, which is adding movement again, it's adding interest maybe, I don't know, I hope. So this was the bass voice. I have here, okay, so this is the next voice. I have here plats from Mutable Instruments or the Macro Oscillator 2 from Audible Instruments. This is set on chord mode. And it's going through the new filter from Squinkulab's Stairway, which is really nice. It adds this really nice character to the sound. And I'm also sending it through the Briatus to add some saturation, some extra saturation. And also I can play with a crash if I want during the patch to add even more movement and more character to the sound. Now I have here a slew limiter, which is just receiving the clock, the divided by 16 clock that we've seen before for the bass. And it's, let me show you this on the scope. And it's creating a sort of a synced LFO because it's receiving the clock and it's limiting its slew. So I have here a sort of a synced LFO which is controlling the frequency of the cutoff point. Very nice. Now I have here also this chord is being triggered again by the sequencer, but through Boolean logic. I have here an XOR logic triggering the macro oscillator. And I have 2 different triggers coming in from the second row. So what I'm doing with the XOR, I'm actually mixing. So when one channel or the other one are playing, I'm receiving a gate. So I'm actually mixing both triggers and triggering the chord. And also I have here another sequential switch which I'm sending offset to it. It has just 2 steps just to change the harmonics which control the chord type. So I have two different chord types, let's say. And then I have another voice. I have here 2 FM operators which I really love. I have here Entropia sending the same sequence to 2 different quantums. One is set to C, E flat and G, and one is set to C, F, G and B flat. So I get different notes in each FM operator. They are going to Chronoblob 2 from all our devices, some delay. And again I have here the U-Mix, which I will come back to later in the video. Also here for the chords I have it. Let's see, another voice. Now I have sort of a melody. Very nice. I take a sequence from the phrase sequence, which I just programmed, and this is going to the XFX Wavetable oscillator with a phase distortion wave. And again I'm using this trick with a slew limiter. I'm taking a divided clock, so I'm dividing the 16 clock by another 2, so it's divided by 32. And again I'm sending it through a slew limiter, so I'm getting a sort of a synced triangle LFO to modulate the wavetable position. If you have any questions, by the way, feel free to leave a comment. And again, this patch will be available in the description so you can have a closer look. And I have a final voice. which is the new black wavetable oscillator from Erica Synths. It's receiving a sequence from the ADDR sequencer. The ADDR sequencer is actually receiving a trigger from the trigger sequencer, so it's also a bit jumpy, let's say, with swing. And again, I'm sending a sequence to the oscillator, and I have the oscillator set to CV to VCA, so I have the built-in VCA here, controlled by the clock. And this is also going to a chronoblob, and I have here another slew limiter. This time the slew limiter is receiving sample and hold from Brains, this here. And I'm slewing, let me also show you this. I'm create sort of a smooth signal. You can see this. Instead of stepwise motion, I get a sort of a slew motion, and this is modulating the wavetable. Very nice. So those were the voices, and it sounds together like this. Let me just reset everything. It sounds like this. And now I want to start, let me just mute this for a second. I want to start and create sections for this song, for this track. Again, create different scenes. So let's see a few of the tools that we can use. I have here up a few modules that I have prepared for us. And the main module is Jooper from nysthi. Which is really nice for creating different scenes in your patch. And this is what we will use. And what we will do, we will mute always different sections or different voices of the song. All in all, I have 16 channels. I have 8 mono channels and 4 stereo channels. So all in all, 16 channels, or 16 mono channels, or 16 cables, let's call it. And I have here 2 mute modules from Boog Audio. Each one has 8 inputs and outputs, and also it has also a CV input that we can trigger or modulate or automate the muting. So I'm going to use Jooper to create scenes, and in each scene different sounds, different voices will be muted, so I can create different sections of my song. Now I have here another module, it's called the fixed voltage source, which is also from nysthi, and what it's doing, it's sending a constant voltage, constant fixed voltage, and I can set exactly the amount of voltage that I want. And why do I have this? First of all, because to control the CV of the mute, to control the mutes. Now how this module, the mute module, is working, let me zoom in a bit. If I click the mute button, it will stay mute, it will toggle on and off. But if I send CV to it, so if for example I want to send, I have here, let's use the keyboard already, I have here the Midi gate set to my keyboard, to my computer keyboard, and I can assign different keys to output a gate. I have, for example, a first key, this is the Z key in my case, and you can see it's outputting a gate. I will show you this also on the scope again. So you see I have here a gate. When I click and when I hold and when I let go, it goes back to 0. Now if I use this to modulate the mute, it will not toggle on and off, but it will stay muted as long as the key is pressed. So you can see I will click now and I will not hold, and you can see that the mute will go on and off directly. You see this? Now if I click and hold, it will stay muted as long as I hold the key, as long as I'm sending, in this case, more than 1 volt. So this is why I have here the constant voltage. I have here the last one set on 1 volt. So if I send this to the mute, you can see that it will stay muted as long as this is connected. And this is why I'm using Jooper. I'm going to route this signal to different sections all the time and create scenes and mute different voices. So let's see how we can do this. First of all, how does the Jooper work? We have 3 different modes. We have exclusive, and you can see that we have inputs and outputs. We have 8 different rows. Each row has 4 inputs, and they are respective to the 4 outputs. So what's coming in A will come out of A, and what's coming in B will come out of B, and so on, as long as the input and the output are active. And you can see this by the yellow light here. And I can click the button next to the row, and it will move the light. It will create different combinations. You see, so I can send C out of C, for example, and activate and deactivate the different inputs and outputs. This was exclusive. You can see we have only 1 light, and it will go from the left to the right. If I skip for a second the multiplexer, we have dual exclusive A and B. So I have 2 A and B triggers. So I have 2 lights which will go A, C, or B and D. The same with the outputs. I also have a global trigger here that I can trigger everything together. And we have the multiplexer mode. Now in multiplexer mode, we can set different combinations for each one of the rows. So if I have now A active, if I click once, B will be active. If I click another time, A and B will be active. If I click once more, C will be active. And now A and C, B and C, A, B and C, just D, A and D, B, D, C, A, B, D, C and D, A, C and D. And you can see we can create all sorts of combinations, that we can use, and we can route input A into all sorts of things. And this is what we will do with Jooper. We will send this 1 volt. We will send this to 3 rows, and I will show you now why. And we will make sure also that the first step is active. So why am I using 3 rows? Because we have, with each row, we have 4 outputs. So I have the first 4 for the first 4 mono voices. We have another 4 for the second 4 mono voices. So we have 8 mono voices, 8 mono channels, let's call it. We have 8 outputs. And we have another 4 outputs, each one for a stereo voice. So each one will go to 2 different channels, and I will show you this in a second also. And like this, we can route this 1 volt to mute the mute modules. We can route this to different channels and mute always different voices and create different sections of our track, of our song. Now, another really cool thing of Jooper is that we can save the scenes, and we can name also each scene differently and jump between them. So let's start first with sending all of our voices to the mutes modules, or through the mutes modules. So I'm going to take channel 1, send it to the first channel of mute, and from there back to channel 1. And now if I solo this voice for a second and I unmute everything, it's playing. If I mute it, it's muted. And like this I can do also with the other voices. Let's take channel 2, for example. And let's solo this here also. Okay. So now we have also the hi-hat, and I can mute just the hi-hat. I can mute just the kick drum. I can mute both. And like this we will work. We will mute different voices. So I will mute everything now. And I will see you in a second. I will make all the connections, and we will get back to work. Okay, so another thing I want to show you before I continue with connecting. Now I connected all of the mono channels. So I have 8 here and 8 here. Again, input to the input of mute. The output goes back to the mixer. There are, by the way, mixers that have also a CV input for mute. So if you are using a mixer that has already mute CV input built in, I guess that you can skip this phase, you can skip these modules, you don't have to use them, you can use just the CV input for the mute in your mixer. In this case, we don't have it. And now I wanted to show you about the stereo channel. So I connected 8 mono channels, and now for connecting the stereo, it's exactly the same. I take the first channel of the stereo and send it back to the mixer, and then the second one will go below it, and then back to the mixer, and so on. So I see you in a second. Okay, so we have all of the channels connected, 8 mono on the left, 8 stereo on the right. Again, stereo means that it has for each voice 2 channels. Let's take this back here up. Okay, very nice. And now we can start creating synths. So what we will do, first of all, we will send the outputs from Jooper to the CV inputs of the mute channels. And again, if you are using a mixer with mute CV inputs, you don't need to use those modules. You can do this directly to the mixer. But now what I connect output A to the first channel, output B to the second channel, and so on. And when we get to the stereo channels, we will do as follows. Again, we will use just one row. If I don't use one row, if I mute the different channels separately from one another, we can have a situation where one voice, just the left channel will be active, and we will mute the right channel. And we don't want to do this. We want to mute the whole of the voice, so both channels. So what I will do, I have here the first stereo channel, the first 2 rows here. I'm going to use output A from the third row to the first channel, but also to the second one. So when this will be muted, when we activate mute on this channel, we will mute all of the sound, all of the voice, both channels of the voice. And I will do this again to the second voice, again 2 channels, to the third voice. So you have to make sure, if you have a stereo channel, to mute both channels together, because otherwise, I mean, you can also do it in a different way, to mute just one side, one channel. So on the left it will be muted, and on the right it will not be muted. But I want to switch off or to mute the voice altogether, left and right. Okay, so let's mute this, and already you can see, let's unmute this, sorry. And already you can see that row number 1, we are not muting anything. You can see none of the channels is active. Row number 2, the first channel is active, so we are muting this voice. This voice we cannot hear, you see it doesn't go to the mixer. The third row, we are muting again the first voice. You can see this, that it's muted. And now we can start creating scenes. So let's start playing a bit and see what will be the first scene. By clicking the trigger here, I can route this mute, this 1 volt, to different sections, to different voices. So let's take the kick out, maybe this hi-hat also, maybe also all of those voices. So here I have the rim shot, I have the open hi-hat and the bass. Very nice. So let's save this as a scene. I have here the scene text where I can enter text, and let's call this hat and rim and bass. Okay, when I'm finished, I'm clicking add, and now we have 1 scene added. Now let's create another scene. So let's see. Let's do something like this, with a few more drums, and maybe also the kick drum. So let's call this now, I just click, delete this and say, let's say kick, and I click add. So now we have 2 scenes. This is the first one. You see we have reviews and next buttons. This is the first scene. You see it saved all the routings we made, and it's muting the different channels. This is the first scene. This is the second one. Now let's change this again and add some more voices. We will create 5 scenes, let's say. Let's add this and call it, let's call this sec1, let's say. Add, and let's create another one. We will call this melody. Add. We have 4 scenes and then another scene with everything together. So I will turn off all of the active outputs and inputs. We will call this all. Add. And now we have 5 scenes. Let's go to the first one with this button here to first. This is our first scene. Second one. Third one. Fourth. And the last one with everything together. Let me save this patch. Okay, so now we have 5 scenes that we can go to the first one, we can go to the previous one, to the next one, and we can move like this sequentially between the scenes. But what I want to do, I want with my keyboard, I want to trigger the different scenes independently. So let's say Z will be scene number 1, X will be scene number 2, C will be scene number 3, and so on. So I can trigger them whenever I want and create live different sections of my song. Now we have here a CV input for the selection. So we can, with control voltage, we can select between the different scenes and jump from one to another. Now how this works, it will receive 0 to positive 10 volts, and it will be divided by the number of scenes we have. So now because we have 10 volts and we have 5 scenes, so each scene will need 2 volts. So 0 volt will be scene number 1, 2 volts scene number 2, 4 volts scene number 3, 6 volts scene number 4, and 8 volts scene number 5. Again, it's 10 divided by 5. So each scene is 2 volts. If you're using more scenes, if you have 10 scenes, each scene will be 1 volt, for example. So you just have to make this calculation. And here you can see already that I have this set up on the fixed voltage source. Again, this will send constant voltage. So if I have here 0, it will always send 0 volts. If I have here 2 volts, it will always send 2 volts. It will never change. And now what I'm doing here, I'm sending this, I have here 0, 2, 4, 6 and 8. So I have 5 different amounts, 5 different voltages, and each one of them will trigger a different scene. Again, 0, scene 1, 2, scene 2, 4, scene 3, 6, scene 4, and so on. And what I'm doing, I'm sending this to the trigger switch from ML. Now what is the trigger switch? The trigger switch will receive, in this case we have 8 inputs, or up to 8 inputs and 1 output. It will receive in each row a signal, and I can trigger it with an external trigger, with an external source, and switch between the different voltages. In our case it's voltages, but it can be all sorts of stuff. And what I'm doing, I want to switch between them, and switch like this between the scenes that we have set up. And what I'm doing to trigger, what I will use to trigger those steps, to trigger those rows, I'm using again my keyboard, my computer keyboard. And it is really easy to set up. You just choose it here in the Midi gate module, and you assign the different keys that you want to use. And I have here again assigned to Z, X, C, V, and B. So I have 5 all in all. And now when I click the keys on my computer, you see I can jump between the different triggers, between the different switches. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to send this to the CV input. And let's make a recap for a second. It sounds a bit complicated, but it's really not. So again, the CV input will receive 1 to positive 10 volts, and it will be, each scene will be a division of those 10 volts according to how many scenes we have. We have the maximum is 10 volts, we have 5 scenes, so each scene will be 2 volts. I have it here set up on my fixed voltage source. I have 5 different voltages set, 0, 2, 4, 6, and 8. This is going to the trigger switch just so I can switch between the different amounts, between the different voltages with my keyboard. Again, you can use also a Midi device. Or you can do this also with a mouse, like this. And this is going from the switch to the CV input. And now I can use my keyboard to switch between the different scenes. So now, again, this will be scene number 1. This will be scene number 2. This will be scene number 3, scene number 4, scene number 5, and now I don't have to move between them sequentially. I can jump from 5 to 2, I can jump from 2 to 4, I can jump from 4 to 1, and so on, and create different sections of my song. And I can see also the names of the scenes here, like I enter them, so I know exactly what's going on in this scene. And what I recommend doing, because we have to click or to switch between the different scenes with the clock. So if we are not directly on the clock, there will be a sort of a glitch or something like this. And we can quantize this by using sample and hold. So again, I have here brains. Let me just put this here up so it's easier. I have brains and it's being triggered by the clock. It's being triggered by a multiplied clock by 4. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to send the output of the trigger switch first to brains, to the input of brains. So brains will sample this output, will sample this voltage every time it receives a clock. And now this will go to the select CV input. And now only when the clock is high, so only on the beat, we will get a change in the scene. So we are sort of quantizing this trigger, quantizing this change. So we are always on the clock and we don't get those glitches. So it will wait for the clock, it will wait for the trigger from the clock to sample this, and then, only then it will send it to the select CV input so we can quantize this. And now I can play, I don't even have to look at the patch, I can just look at Jooper and just play my song and trigger the different sections. And you can see also here the lights are changing because the routing is changing. You see, so I can jump between the different scenes and create a song. Now this is doing it manually. But let me show you also a way to do this automatically. I have here another module from nysthi, it's called Janneker. And this will work together with Jooper. So let's just make space for this, just a second, and I will again save the patch, just in case, who knows. And what Janneker will do, it will receive our clock, and we can choose to go with the clock upwards or downwards. I will show you this also in a second. We can also here save scenes, and in each scene we can select how many pulses or triggers we want the Janneker to count before it's outputting a trigger. So we have here the end of pulses trigger output, and this will send a trigger output every time the counting is finished. So let's say, let me show you this. Let's say I have here, let's go with, let's say 8 pulses. And now by sending a trigger for my clock or by clicking this here, I can go with the current pulse upwards. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And in the next trigger, it will send the trigger out of the end of pulses trigger output. So let's make the connection and you can see that it's moving. I will delete the select CV input. So we are not controlling this with the keyboard anymore. And I will send the end of process to the next trigger input of Jooper. And now when I click once more on +1, because the counting is finished, it counted until 8, it will trigger the next scene. So let's go to the previous scene just for a second, and let's say that the first scene of Janneker will be 8. So I will add this to the scene, and now I want it to count 16, let's say. So I will add another scene, and now I want it again to count 8. And now I want it to count, let's say 12, I don't know why. So we have 3 scenes, 4, let's go with 6 now. Add, okay, and now I can send my clock to the +1, and it will start counting. Let me just zoom out, zoom out a bit. So this will go to my clock, and you can send whichever division of the clock you want. And you can see it's counting. 16. And it's changing between the scenes automatically. So we have this automated, and of course you can change this. This is just an example, but you can change this to count, I don't know, 64 beats, or you can send a really slow division of the clock and create bars, intro, drop, whatever. Everything will be automated. So as soon as you hit run, everything will start running, and you can concentrate on tweaking stuff, and the voices will come in and out as you made the scenes, and with Janneker the counting. Okay, now let's take this out for a second, and let's go back to the first scene. And let's go back with controlling this with the keyboard for a second, because I want to show you something. Let's say that in one scene, I want to add also transposition of the scale of the notes. So not just to add different voices to the scene, but I want also to create movement in the pitch. So I have here one tool we can use, constants, which is really similar to the fixed voltage source, but here it will output constant voltage in semitones. So I don't have to calculate how much voltage is in 3 semitones, for example. So I can send, for example, +7 semitones and so on. And what I will do, I will use another row of Jooper. I will send the +7 to an active input. And now I'm going to choose, let's take Jooper with us for a ride for a second. Let's take it here. I'm going to choose now from which, let's say from the second output I want it to come out. Because in all of the scenes, the first output is active. Let's take this. By the way, when the select CV input is connected, the next and previous buttons will not work. So let's disconnect it for a second. You can see the first output is always active in all of the scenes. So I don't want to start changing everything. So I will send it out of the second output. And only when the second output will be active, and this we will do for one of the scenes, the transposition will go out. So now I can take this +7 semitones and start sending it to all of my different voices. And I don't want to send them to quantum, I want to actually transpose the pitch. If I send it to quantum, I transpose the scale and not the pitch. I want to transpose the pitch. That's why I have the UMix, the unity mixer. So what I will do, for example, for the FM operators, I will send the volt per octave first to the mixer, and then to the volt per octave. I will do this for both voices, and I will mix in the +7 semitones when it will be active from the second step. I hope this is clear. If not, again, leave me a comment. I will be happy to explain this again. Okay, so now when the scene will be active, and we will set this scene in a second, and the second output will be active, it will send +7 semitones, but also what's coming out of quantum, because we are mixing the signals. So these are the FM operators. We have also the even VCO, again, I will just send it to the volt per octave input. In this case, they don't receive from anywhere else, so I don't need to use a mixer. I have here the black wavetable oscillator. Again, first of all, from Quantum, it will go to the mixer, and then I will add the 7 semitones. Something is weird here with the wave oscillator. Let's zoom in and out. Let's see if it's getting fixed. Sometimes there's this here. Okay, never mind. Let's say the CV is going... Oh, now it's okay. Volt per octave. So first of all, again, to the mixer, from the mixer to the volt per octave, and I will add the 7 semitones. What else do we have here? The drums. I don't want to transpose in this case. We have the melody, we have the bass, we have the black wavetable, we have the FM operators. Oh, and we have the chords also. So again, the chords, I'm going to send this, actually here I don't even need the mixer to send this directly to the chords, okay, because I don't receive volt per octave from somewhere. And now let's set a scene where this will happen. So we have the first scene, I don't want this, also here note, also in this note, or you know what, maybe in scene number 3. So here, every time it will be in scene number 3, and of course you can create more scenes and change everything, but I want to keep it simple in this video. So in scene number 3, I want that the second output will be active, and I will send this this plus 7 semitones. So let's make this. So now it's active, and you can see that we have a change in pitch, and now I want to update this scene. So all I have to do is click update, and now the changes will be saved to the scene. If I would not save the changes and go to a different scene, the changes would not have been saved. So you have to click update. So we have this here, the scene before, you see it's not active. I go to the scene after it, and now it's transposing pitch, and now I can add also other voices, but again it will not be transposed. And the last scene, so one of the scenes, scene number 3, is also transposing the pitch, so you can create also all sorts of transposition scenes, let's call it. And again, you can trigger them manually, or you can trigger them with a keyboard or an external controller. Let's put this back here, which is also manually, but what I meant, you can also trigger them with Janneker, which will do this automatically. You can set the amount of pulses you want that it will count. And I think that was it, guys. So we have our scenes, and you can go ahead and create and build a song actually, and create an intro and create all sorts of stuff, a drop, and all sorts of different scenes and sections for your song. Again, thank you Patreons for this nice idea for a video, and thank you also for your support. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the like button. If you enjoy what I do, consider also becoming a Patreon. Again, thanks for watching. Please subscribe and hit the bell, and have a good one.